Hi, everyone. This is Ray Luskin, artist, author, activist, and a creative mindfulness mentor. And welcome to another wonderful call for our Women Who Dare conference. Today, my guest, excuse me, is Noel Bairey Merz, MD. She's the director of the Barbra Streisand Women's Health Center, the Linda Joy Pullen Women's Heart Health Program, the Erica J. Glazer Women's Heart Research Initiative, and Preventive Cardiac Center at the Cedars-Sinai Heart Institute. She is also professor of medicine at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. And your CV goes on forever and ever. So I'm going to stop there. So welcome. First, I want to ask you, about why cardiac health for women. What inspired you to get into that?
Well, the basic answer to any investigator, a researcher, is, why did Willie Sutton rob banks, right? So right. Why do investigators study specific topics? Because you can get it funded. And at the time that I was coming of age as an investigator, I had finished my clinical training and I was wanting to, become a more established investigator. We were facing an epidemic of death due to heart disease in women, which prior to 1984 wasn't really recognized because they never sex stratified the data. We would just always see these aggregates of 500,000 deaths due to cardiovascular disease in the United States. And nobody really looked at whether or not it was mostly women, mostly men. Back in the distant past, the Framingham had sex stratified their data. This was in the 1950s. And dominantly at that time, it was male deaths. And we have to remember the 1950s were, the 2 martini lunch and the cigarettes and the beef Wellingtons, our prosperity after World War II. So this had kind of crept up on people, and there was the sound of the alarm at our National Institutes of Health that more women than men were dying of cardiovascular disease. This was a complete flip from previous decades. What was going on? So, as a female cardiologist, I was unusual. Even now, there are not that many female cardiologists, but there were even fewer when I was coming into the specialty. And, you see disparities if you live in that group. Even though I don't have heart disease, but I could see that there were differences between women and men, and that was of interest to me at being female.
Okay, well, I want to ask you, what are the differences then, in cardiac, issues for men and women, and how do they present differently?
So that's been 25 years of research, and there's a lot of differences. One of my fellows today in our research in progress meeting demonstrated in our data set that what's been known for a long time, women have smaller hearts, even adjusted for their smaller body size. They're still smaller. And they pump more vigorously. And this is just thought to be a sex difference of no important consequence, but well described in physiologic literature for decades. But we are publishing for the first time that actually this is a very important sex difference, because when we declare the pumping function to be abnormal, we're using a male standard, which is about 5 to 6 points lower than the female standard. And so what happens, and this is what her data and her analysis of our data showed, is that women are not picked up until it's too late. Mm-hmm. And we see this now in the heart failure literature, that women, this is an important disparity. Women with heart failure do not do as well as men. Often the treatments don't work well. Well, come on, hang on.
Right. Well, this is really, I wanted to have you because it's very personal. I have 4 girlfriends in the last 2 years, One had a heart attack, one had a stroke, one just had valve work and is in cardiac rehab, and the other just presented with some of these anomalies that you've talked about in the past. And so she wore a heart monitor for a month, did the stress test, the echo, all the things, and they still haven't found anything. So on the one hand, she's thrilled, but they still don't know why the issue. So it's very personal to me. So I'm glad I get to talk to an expert today and hear about what's going on. So, why don't we talk about, first of all, what are some of the work you're doing, let's say at the Heart Institute right now, and then we'll get into more of the advocacy pieces and the preventive medicine and things like that, and some of the myths, because I think that's really important to understand the myths around, heart disease in women.
So the Barbra Streisand Women's Heart Center in the Heart Institute at Cedars-Sinai does research, and I'll mostly describe that, but we also do clinical care. We are a subspecialty clinic. We do education, so we educate future healthcare providers, medical students, medical residents, fellows. And then last but not least, we do policy. And we also do community education. Some of the research that we're focused on now we have been studying a pattern called INOCA, ischemia with no obstructive coronary disease, or MINOCA, myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack with no obstructive coronary disease. These are two conditions that are more prevalent in women. It's why, like your friend, they get all this diagnostic testing that's looking for plugged up arteries, which is the male pattern, and they don't find it. And then they are told that they don't have a problem when in fact they really did have a heart attack, or they really do have an abnormal stress test or persistent chest pain. And our lines of research include understanding the mechanisms, how does this develop? What happens to it after 5 and 10 years? And then importantly, we're doing intervention clinical trials. One of them is called the Warrior, and it is.
I was reading about this. I think that started in 2019. So and it's a 4-year study, correct?
Yes.
So you're past the halfway mark. So.
We have half of the patients in. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we have not enrolled as rapidly as we had planned. So we are going to go into some no-cost extensions and hopefully be able to finish it. We will finish it. We're tough.
You're tough. Okay, I get that. So,
and we're also doing a stem cell trial, meaning your own stem cells from your own peripheral blood. We can manufacture them to be better, stronger, faster, and then we inject them back in. This is a phase 2B trial. A pilot trial was very positive. So these are the kinds of research that we're doing.
Okay, fabulous. So let's talk about the idea, you think about a man, oh my God, in every movie, it's like, oh, my chest is killing me, but that's not how women present. So could you talk about that? Because I think that's so important, when we're talking, and this is primarily women today. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, about 2/3 of men have what would be considered the traditional Hollywood heart attack or heart symptoms. A pressure, sometimes a pain, but mostly a sense of pressure in the sternum, in the mid-chest. It might radiate to the arm or the shoulder or the jaw, 2/3 of men. And that is the pattern that is taught to medical students, to cardiologists, and to the community. It turns out only 1/3 of women will present with that typical pattern. The other 2/3 can experience it as undue fatigue, stomach upset. Women are more likely to say that it must be, spasm or just a stomach indigestion, hot sweats, shortness of breath, feeling clammy.
You'd almost think it's the flu, especially today. Everybody's going to say, oh, it's the flu. Yeah.
Exactly. So we have worked as part of our policy and our community education to inform the public that really anything above the waist that is unusual for you should be reported to a healthcare provider. And this will help that 2/3 of women that are hesitant to take action because, as you say, they think it's just something, a passing virus. But it'll also help the 1/3 of men, which is a lot of men.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we have 500,000 deaths every year.
Wow, that's huge. I think that most women think that, breast cancer is still the major cause of death for women, and I don't think that's true anymore. So it is mind-boggling, but we have to educate women. So when you go into the community, how are you doing that? Are you doing PSAs in your area? Are you going and actually having talks now in schools and in libraries, and what are you doing?
Yeah, all of the above. And we do have a PSA campaign because there's only, one of me, and I have
Right.
20 people on our team here, but that's still pretty small compared to the whole United States, or even trying to educate internationally, right? Because this is an international problem. But public health campaigns, and we're working actually with some of the federal initiatives that are going on in the White House, at HHS, at the CDC. There is a renewed interest in public health.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I mean, today it's like, if you believe in doctors, there is a renewed interest.
Yeah, we're going to see a tsunami of increased cardiovascular death because of the mitigation strategies with the pandemic. Many people have gained weight. Many people, children have gained weight, and they're less physically active. And people were doing more, comfort eating to deal with stress. So unfortunately, we're anticipating
larger numbers. Okay. Well, let's talk about how we can reverse that or mitigate that. What kind of lifestyle activities, nutrition wise, exercise. And I was reading an article from Harvard Review in 2018 about meditation, which is one of my pieces, that I really believe in meditation for stress release and things like that. So, I'd love to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, we were funded by the NIH, the Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine, to do a meditation study. We used TM because it was trademarked and similar to using a drug, good seal of approval. If you use a TM instructor, you'll know that they really are doing transcendental meditation. And we did demonstrate that there was an improvement in the heart rhythm. It was called heart rate variability, but it's something that predicts cardiovascular death. We also demonstrated, somewhat surprisingly, that their insulin and glucose levels improved, meaning many heart disease patients are just on the precipice of becoming diabetic, or they are sometimes frankly diabetic 20% of the time. And their insulin sensitivity improved with meditation. Their blood pressure also improved.
Yeah, yeah. So what kind of, now I personally, I need to be out in nature. That's when I have to walk and meditate that way and notice the beauty around me. That's a big part of it. I mean, I also do other visualizations, meditations, those kind of pieces as well. And it's sort of like when the cancer started and people would meditate, they would have visualized the Pac-Man eating the cells. So it's sort of like, I know that it's been in and out of medicine in favor of that. So, but I think that we have more to offer. Journaling, I think, there were some studies that, when you journal and you just write down your fears and all that, your body responds positively to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I think there is alternative and complementary practices that at a minimum can smooth the stresses and strains of life, help us with resilience, help us with grit. And then at a maximum, if you can get a big study funded, you can see if the cells are behaving better, if the blood pressure's better, what you might consider more objective measures.
Okay.
So I think there's a lot to be said for it. That said, if it was that great, we wouldn't need, stents and bypass and pills. So the nice thing is when you can use both. And
I agree. I love the idea of East meets West, as they say. So exactly. Let's talk about, diet. and the idea, especially we've gained weight during COVID, the extra pounds, will that, if we get that weight off, does that really impact the heart or, tremendously, a little bit? And what kind of diet would you suggest, as well as exercise?
Mm-hmm. We are seeing the ramifications of the obesity epidemic, and inherently being overweight or obese doesn't cause more heart disease, but what it does is it causes more diabetes, it causes more hypertension, it causes more insulin resistance. And so it's an indirect pattern. There's a little bit of debate about whether or not there's healthy obesity. Women in particular deposit the fat under the skin instead of in the abdomen and around their internal organs. So there might be healthy obesity, particularly in women. But that said, there's a lot of adverse health consequences of being overweight and obese. On the other hand, being super lean, model lean, is not healthy either. And so women in particular, and I would encourage your listeners to just, they can Google BMI, body mass index. You can calculate that very easily, and even on your smartphone. And for women, a healthy body mass index is probably 22, 23, 24, even up to 25, where a lot of women will be told that they're fat with a body mass index of 25, which is not right. And you said earlier, we need to do some myth busting. A lot of women are shamed by healthcare providers and the public about their weight. Men typically are not, or much less. So what is probably, clearly important to women and men is the quality of the nutritional regimen.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do counsel to a Mediterranean style of eating. And that is basically the primary source of your protein should be from nuts and beans, legumes, lentils, any kind of bean, complex carbohydrates, no white, nothing should be white. And when you have a meal, over half of your plate should be things that grow out of the ground, fruits and vegetables. Sparing amounts of alcohol with the meal. And then twice a week, a piece of animal flesh the size of your palm. Ideally, it should be a marine fish. It should be fish, shellfish. Minimal sweets, minimal refined carbohydrates. So that's Mediterranean style eating. It doesn't mean that you have to eat pasta. And for example, traditional Japanese food is Mediterranean style, meaning the composition,
Okay.
even though they don't have that red tomato sauce.
Right. They may have soy or tamari, so
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to ask, because I've always been heavy. That is where I've been in my life. I'm blessed. I've been healthy. I only take levothyroxine. That's all I've ever taken, and supplements. So do you believe in there are other things that affect us? Genetics, hormones as women. What does that play into our health and and again, aging? I'm 71. Is it going to be different for me to talk to you versus somebody who's 50 or 40? What are you, how are you handling those kind of conversations?
Well, that's where sort of making objective measures of health can be very useful. Obviously we're all different. We have different body types. A certain amount of what we are is inherited from our family genes. And then families do more than share genes. They share the environment, right? They share the health habits. They share the nutrition, the physical activity, the love of nature, all of the things that we think are potentially health enhancing. So everybody's different, but taking those objective measures, we're checking a blood pressure, checking a blood sugar, checking a blood cholesterol level, checking for your body mass index and then adjusting that for what we call muscle mass or lean muscle mass, which you can get at a lot of the fitness gyms. You stand on what appears to be a scale, just a regular bathroom scale, but it really isn't. And then you hold these two handles and it will give you your percent body fat and your lean muscle mass. And you know, women should be aiming to be 20% or less. Men should be probably 15 to 14% or less of fat mass. And what you'll see is athletes, I mean, as we saw this summer in the Olympics, some of those athletes are really big people, but it's all muscle. Mm-hmm. And metabolically, they're very healthy. There are other people that appear very lean. Their weight is average or even below average, but they don't exercise and it's all fat. Mm-hmm. And they are not metabolically healthy.
Right. So when you talk about exercise, so I mean, I've been in the Fitbit. I wear my Fitbit all the time, and and I have my where I'm going, and it's like usually about 3 miles a day, and I've noticed for myself, walking is fine, but I started dancing in my house because that gets my heart rate up. I don't walk that way, but I can dance that way and stuff. So, there's things that I don't know about the myth. I've heard it's a myth. You have to walk 10,000 steps a day, that was created in a marketing campaign, so I don't know, there's so many things that are going on in the health industry. You don't know where you can go for actual information and resources. And what will you say to somebody who's worried about their heart? How do you approach a doctor? When do you see a specialist? There's a lot of information out there, or misinformation.
There totally is, to the Fitbit issue, and you don't have to even have a Fitbit. Most smartphones will step count for you if you just find it and turn it on, and then you have to put the smartphone on your belt or right. somewhere on your body. And the number, it's less about the mileage right now in terms of public health, and it's more about step count. And what's easy and the data would support is 7,000 steps per day.
Oh, good. That's my average. Sometimes I can be, 10,000, 12,000, but that's where I've been working to be. So, oh, good. Okay. Yay.
Yeah. And so that's not so hard. I mean, most of us can walk, and
it's the little things, if I'm going to the grocery store, I do park the furthest away to walk to the grocery store. I mean, I had heard these for years, but I really adopted them, and they're just habits now, so yeah.
And when we look at, you mentioned aging earlier, when we look at populations that have more successful or maybe healthier aging, particularly in Asia, the folks, as they age, they remain active. They're doing a lot of walking, they're doing shopping, they're carrying bags. So we can learn from that as well and not spend quite so much time in our car. You wanted to talk about providers.
Yes.
So much of this screening of risk factors really can be done by a primary care physician or what we call an advanced practice, a nurse practitioner, a physician's assistant, even pharmacists now. Not only do they give out vaccines, they can take your blood pressure. There are kits where you can measure your own cholesterol with a finger stick. There are plenty of kits, as we know from our friends that have diabetes, that you can measure your sugar. There's a wand device now that you can stick on your shoulder and swing your smartphone by it, and it will give you your glucose level. So you can.
I've seen that advertised. Yes.
Yeah, you can decide. Do I really want? Let me see what happens when I eat the ice cream cone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because information is valuable, right? So those are very easy things that would all be for prevention. If someone has symptoms, chest discomfort, shortness of breath, fainting, a laundry list of symptoms that they are potentially concerned that it could be heart. yeah, you would want to start, well, you could start with your primary care physician if it's not acute. If it's acute, you need to go to an emergency room, urgent care, call your cardiologist. People that have established cardiovascular conditions that are being chronically managed, and we have many of those patients, chronic disease management really works. They should see a cardiologist once, twice, even 4 times a year, depending on the, severity of their illness.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, one of the young women who I even forgot about that, when I told you the 4, there's somebody else who just, she had a severe asthma and she just couldn't breathe, and she got in, and then they did all the heart tests and found out, oh, it's my heart, not my lungs. Yes, my lungs are bad, but what's causing this is her heart. And sometimes you go in presenting one way and then you come out with something else, and then you do find out you've got this heart issue. And I think so many people are scared, because again, we don't know what to expect, and in cancer, there's always a cancer group you can join. I don't know, do they have people who are in heart groups to talk about heart disease and how to manage it? I've never heard of that. Whereas, in the cancer world, you can always find a group, kind of thing.
No, we do. We have Facebook groups. We have groups that are networked within a cardiac rehabilitation program. We have a stroke survivor group. So, women like to talk about breast cancer. And I think it's probably because breasts in some way define womanhood. And so you hear a lot about breast cancer.
Well, and 20 years ago, it was taboo. You couldn't talk about it. So I'm thrilled that they're talking about it. Yeah. And men wear pink and, all the other stuff. But yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know that women don't sign up as much as they might sign up for a breast cancer group, but those groups definitely exist. And the internet has made this, more feasible, even despite, the COVID lockdowns. So we're all kind of tired of Zoom, but hey, I mean, it beats the alternatives.
Right. So do you have any final, well, I guess I'm going to ask, there's still a bridge, there's a big gap that needs to be, from what you're telling me about research, women, and getting the word out there. So what would you say needs to happen next? And what roles can you play? What role can we play in that?
I've increasingly come to realize that until you change policy, it's very hard to change things on an individual level. And I think this is true for cigarette smoking. We saw that. No, there was a lackadaisical approach to cigarette smoking cessation until we outlawed it in public places. And in the state of California now, the rate of smoking is approaching less than 5%.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. But and so I do think that we will continue to suffer with cardiovascular disease in women and men until we start working on some policy. And one of the policies that is being readdressed after many failures is to regulate the added salt content of processed foods.
Oh, interesting.
Not to regulate salt. You can take that salt shaker and use it as much as you want. But why, when we buy a loaf of bread, why does it have more salt than our physician would like us to consume?
Yeah, it's the same thing with sugar. When you look at the label, sugar is in almost every product, and it's the same issue. It's like
the same issue.
Yeah, we're not taking care of everybody, and that can be changed. And we can create something. So, so who is behind this then? How are you getting this policy addressed?
Lots of groups. The American Heart Association is re-asking about, the salt reduction initiative. And what happens, of course, is when you reduce the salt in processed foods, you start to be able to taste it again. And people will acclimate to that, and those that want to salt it can do it. So it's societies, it's foundations, it's academic groups such as myself. We testify, we go to the Congress, we put omnibus acts together. We would very much like to fund a public service campaign for women's heart disease. We are seeing increases in relatively young women, premenopausal women under the age of 50, particularly brown and Black women with increasing heart disease death rates. And heretofore, this was a group that was thought to be protected. So that's not okay. And we need a campaign because these women need to be getting screening at some level. We need somebody to pay for that.
Right. And you need a celebrity endorsement, because if you have a celebrity talking, then they listen. You know, you need a Beyonce or somebody like that to get to that community.
Yep.
Or that kind of thing, or partner. One of the women I interviewed, her name is Quintana Leader, and she does filmmaking in California and LA for the Latino community, and educational pieces as well. Maybe you could talk to her, you know, who knows?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
an advocacy group worked with the FDA to review the evidence and decide that the black box warning of the cholesterol lowering pills, the statins, are most effective pills since penicillin in terms of saving lives. They removed the black box warning for women of reproductive age because they have not seen harm. And what you know, we think this is one of probably the contributing causes to the rising death rate in these young premenopausal women is that physicians are reluctant to prescribe because of the concern about exposing the fetus to the cholesterol.
Okay.
Pill.
So what is an alternative then for somebody that age, you know, in the
No, they can take the statin now.
They can't. Okay. But the doctors are still
black box
reluctant. Again, you need
off.
a campaign to them as well to say, okay, this is okay now. So
get your cholesterol checked, and if it's too high, you can take the cholesterol lowering pill. When you become pregnant, you can stop it, and then you can start again when you're not pregnant anymore.
Okay.
I mean, there's so many things that you know, women have been put on pedestals because I guess we're just so fragile and can't take it. So advocacy is paying off. I think things are getting better, but there is a lot of work to be done.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate the information. People can actually listen to somebody who is an authority and been working so diligently on this for a long time. And I always like to end with a quote, and this is one of my favorites: "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." Eleanor Roosevelt, and you have a beautiful dream. So thank you for being here today, and I so appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for your attention to this important topic. Appreciate it.